Today, people often call an illness, a difficult relationship, a stressful job, or a painful season in life their cross to bear. Most of the time, they simply mean, "This is the hardship I have to endure." That phrase is familiar now. But when Jesus first said, "Take up your cross," the cross was not a general symbol for hardship. It was not jewelry. It was not church architecture. And it was not yet a sacred Christian symbol. To people living under Roman power, the cross was connected to public execution, humiliation, and shame. It belonged to the world of soldiers, condemned criminals, public roads, crowds, warnings, and death. So when Jesus said, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me," he was not simply saying, life will sometimes be difficult. He was using one of the most severe images his listeners would have known. But this has to be handled carefully. It does not mean every painful thing in life is automatically your cross. It does not mean suffering is always holy. It does not mean abuse should be endured in silence. And it does not mean Jesus was asking people to hate themselves. To understand what he meant, we need to return to the world where those words first landed. A world where Rome used the cross not only to kill, but to warn. In modern language, we often talk about our cross to bear as any burden we didn't choose, like a chronic illness, a difficult family situation, or a private grief. Sometimes people use the phrase sincerely, saying, "This is hard, but I am trying to remain faithful." And Christian faith never pretends that pain isn't real. But when we call every minor inconvenience a cross, the original image shrinks. The cross slowly becomes a generic religious term for anything we wish would go away. But Jesus was not speaking about generic hardship. In the ancient world, the cross meant something specific. It was public, shameful, tied to Roman power, and completely final. So before we ask what it means to take up your cross today, we must first understand what those words meant before the resurrection changed everything. In the Roman world, crucifixion was not only a way to execute someone, it was designed to send a clear, public message. Rome did not merely want the condemned dead. They wanted everyone to see what happened to rebels, slaves, and threats to public order. The cross was meant to be highly visible as a warning. It said, "This is what happens when Rome makes an example out of you." That is why crucifixion was not only physically brutal. It was designed to be deeply and socially humiliating. The victim was exposed, displayed, and mocked. The ultimate point of this practice was to inflict absolute shame before death. In many Roman executions, the condemned person was forced to carry the heavy horizontal wooden beam toward the site. We shouldn't pretend every execution was identical. Roman practices varied by time and place, but the public exposure was constant. The road became the punishment, the watching crowd became the shame, and the condemned person became a living warning sign. So when Jesus said, "Take up your cross," his listeners did not picture a beautiful gold pendant or a comforting religious symbol. They pictured someone whose life was publicly handed over, someone who had lost their reputation walking a road toward death. That is why this phrase was so severe. Jesus was not using a gentle metaphor for personal struggle, but naming a path of costly surrender. The timing of Jesus' words matters. In the Gospels, Jesus speaks about taking up the cross before his own crucifixion, meaning the disciples heard it differently than we do. They did not yet wear the cross, sing about it, or place it on buildings. They heard the word as people who knew exactly what Roman crosses were actually used for. In Mark chapter 8, Peter confesses Jesus is the Christ, but rebukes him when Jesus teaches that the Son of Man must suffer, be killed, and rise again. Jesus calls the crowd and says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." The command corrects a false expectation. Peter wants the Messiah without the road of suffering, but Jesus says his followers cannot choose discipleship without complete surrender to God's path. Before Jesus says, "Take up your cross," he says, "Let him deny himself." This phrase is easily misunderstood as self-hatred, but that is not what it means. Jesus is not commanding self-hatred, asking us to despise the life God gave us, or telling wounded people to remain in harmful, toxic situations. To deny yourself is not to deny that you are human. It is to deny the self the right to be Lord. My comfort, reputation, and control are not the highest good. It does not mean you have no identity. It means your deepest identity is received from Christ, not built around defensive self-protection. Jesus is not asking for the destruction of the person. He is asking for the surrender of the throne, and that is why the next image is the cross. This passage has to be handled with care, because Christians have sometimes used the phrase, "take up your cross," in deeply harmful ways. Someone is mistreated or trapped in abuse, and they are told, "That is just your cross to bear," turning exhaustion and burnout into a false standard of faithfulness. But Jesus does not tell people to romanticize suffering. He does not say every painful situation is holy, or turn abuse into discipleship by placing religious language over it. In this passage, the cross is tied directly to following him. We must distinguish between suffering in general and the true cost of Christian discipleship. Some suffering should be resisted, relieved, or brought into the light. Taking up the cross never erases wisdom, nor does it remove our need for safety. It means that when faithfulness to Jesus becomes costly, we do not get to choose a safer, comfortable version of discipleship where the old self remains untouched. A stressful job may be hard, but it is not automatically a cross. A difficult relationship may be painful, but it is not automatically a cross. An illness may be heavy, but it is not automatically what Jesus meant by "take up your cross." Those situations may become places where a person learns endurance, prayer, patience, and dependence on God. But the cross, in Jesus' words, is not simply whatever hurts. The cross is connected to allegiance. It is the cost of following Jesus when following him threatens the self we are trying to preserve. It may look like telling the truth when a lie would protect your image. It may look like refusing revenge when retaliation would feel satisfying. It may look like losing status because you will not abandon integrity. It may look like forgiving without pretending the wound did not matter. It may look like obeying Christ when obedience makes you less impressive to the people whose approval you wanted. It may look like surrendering an ambition that has become your identity. The key is not pain by itself. The key is allegiance. That is why 3 words help us understand the image: humiliation, allegiance, and death. Humiliation, because the cross was public shame. Allegiance, because taking up the cross means following Jesus on his terms. Death, because the old self-centered way of life is being put to death. Not because the body is worthless, not because the person has no value, but because the self cannot remain Lord where Christ is Lord. The final phrase is easy to miss. Jesus does not only say, "deny yourself." He does not only say, "take up your cross." He says, "follow me." That changes the whole command. The cross is not the destination by itself. Jesus is. Discipleship is not suffering for the sake of suffering. It is following Jesus, even when the road passes through loss. This matters because some people can build an identity around pain. They may begin to think that the more miserable they are, the more faithful they must be. But Jesus does not say, "seek crosses." He says, "follow me." If following him brings comfort, receive it with gratitude. If following him brings community, receive it with gratitude. If following him brings joy, do not feel guilty for joy. But if following him brings rejection, loss, or shame, do not be surprised as though faithfulness has failed. The cross is not a command to chase suffering. It is a warning not to abandon Jesus when obedience becomes costly. Jesus continues, "For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." That sentence explains the logic of the cross. Trying to save your life can actually lose it. This doesn't mean we shouldn't value life. It is a gift from God. The problem is clinging to self so tightly that we refuse Jesus. We save our reputation by avoiding truth. We save our comfort by avoiding obedience. We save our control by avoiding surrender. We save our image by hiding repentance. We save our place in the group by staying silent when faithfulness requires courage, and in trying to protect the life we built around ourselves, we begin to lose the life Jesus is calling us into. Then Jesus asks, "What does it profit a person to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" The opposite of taking up the cross is not simply having an easy life. The opposite is gaining the world while losing yourself. Winning approval while losing truth, keeping comfort while losing obedience, preserving status while losing allegiance. Jesus is not merely asking, "Can you handle pain?" He is asking, "What are you trying to save that may actually be destroying you?" For the first disciples, this would not have sounded inspiring in the way it sometimes sounds now. They were not hearing a polished religious phrase. They were hearing the language of public execution. Imagine expecting Jesus to announce victory and hearing him talk about a cross. Imagine hoping the Messiah will bring honor, only to hear an image of shame. Imagine wanting discipleship to secure your life, only to hear Jesus speak of losing it. That is the shock. Jesus does not recruit followers by hiding the cost. He places surrender at the entrance. Not because there is no resurrection. There is resurrection, not because suffering gets the final word. It does not. But because there is no faithful way to follow Jesus while keeping the old self on the throne. The cross comes before the empty tomb. Surrender comes before vindication. Losing life for Jesus' sake comes before finding it. This is why the phrase cannot be reduced to ordinary hardship. Hardship may happen to anyone, but taking up the cross is about the cost of allegiance to Jesus. It is the willingness to follow him when the self says, "Protect me, promote me, keep me in control," and Jesus says, "Follow me." So what does take up your cross mean today? It does not mean every painful thing in your life should be passively accepted, or that you should stay in danger or call mistreatment holy. It means following Jesus involves the surrender of self-rule. There will be moments when obedience costs something, a reputation, a comfort, a plan, or a relationship built on compromise. It means the Christian life is not built around self-fulfillment as the highest goal. It is built around allegiance, the kind that places a person under the care of the true Lord. Jesus does not call people to lose their life because he despises life. He calls them to lose the false life that keeps them from receiving real life from him. The road of the cross is not a dead end. Jesus is calling us through surrender into life. But the surrender is real, the cost is real, and the old self does not step down easily. Maybe we should be slower to call every hardship my cross. Some hardships are simply part of living in a broken world. Some are burdens to share, some are wounds to heal, some are injustices to confront, some are dangers to escape, some are consequences we need to own. But there are moments when faithfulness to Jesus brings us to a kind of death. The death of pride, the death of revenge, the death of reputation as our master, the death of comfort as our highest good, the death of control as our security, the death of the self that wants Jesus only as long as Jesus does not contradict it. That is closer to what the first listeners would have heard. Not a vague burden, but a road of surrender. Not private inconvenience, but public allegiance. Not suffering as an identity, but following Jesus as Lord. This is why the cross was disturbing before it became familiar. It told the disciples that Jesus was not offering a path where the old self remains untouched. Take up your cross did not originally mean endure any difficult thing that happens to you. It did not mean pretend pain is good, stay silent in harm, or hate yourself. To Jesus' first listeners, the cross meant public shame, Roman power, condemnation, and death. So when Jesus used that image, he was saying something more serious than life will be hard. He was saying that following him requires the surrender of self-rule. The old life built on self-protection, self-glory, and self-control cannot remain king. To take up the cross is to follow Jesus even when the road costs what the old self was trying to save. It is humiliation, allegiance, and death to self. But the command does not end with the cross alone. It ends with, "Follow me." The one who calls us to surrender is the one who walks the road first. He does not speak about the cross from a safe distance. He goes there, and because he goes there, the cross is no longer only a Roman instrument of shame. Through him, it becomes the place where false power is exposed, self-saving is undone, and life is received as a gift. That does not make the words easy, it makes them honest. So the next time we hear the phrase, "my cross to bear," we should ask carefully, is this harm that needs to be resisted, or is this a moment where following Jesus is calling me to surrender something the old self is desperate to keep? Because to Jesus' first listeners, taking up the cross did not mean carrying a difficult season with patience. It meant walking the road of the condemned. And Jesus used that image to tell the truth about discipleship. The life we try to save at all costs is the very life we must surrender. And the life we receive from him is worth more than the whole world. Subscribe and share this video with someone who needs this perspective. Because Jesus was not using the cross to make every painful season sound holy. He was calling his followers to costly allegiance, not suffering for the sake of suffering, not pain as an identity, but a life surrendered to him, even when obedience costs the old self, something it does not want to lose. But take up your cross is not the only teaching of Jesus that has been softened. Next, we look at another widely misunderstood command. Turn the other cheek. Today, many hear those words as a command to accept abuse. But to his first listeners, this stood inside a culture of power, honor, shame, and courageous resistance. Watch the next video to discover what turn the other cheek actually meant and why it may be far more courageous than passive.